I think we might get started, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, Councillor Hughes and Councillor Little. Oh, you're at a different meeting. Oh, right. Okay, I'd like to firstly welcome members of our community stakeholders. Apparently stakeholders is a very important term, but welcome everyone. You're shaking your head, Kingsley, why? You're not a stakeholder? No? No, you're not a stakeholder. Oh, I think you are. Okay. Okay. Can you hear it? Can you hear? Oh, you can't hear it. Oh, is that what the problem is? Okay. We'll do a test so that you can hear. I can barely see you that far away. I can hear you just. So far away. Yeah. There's a screen. Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me now? No.
I need to keep talking about it.
Can you hear me now? No. Is that better? I can't hear you, Janet. So can you hear me now? You can. I can't, you're not nodding or shaking your head. Is that a yes or a no?
It's better. I think
it's better. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we'll see how we go. All right, so thank you for everyone for coming along to this workshop where we're going to be presented with an update to the Essex Park and Gawler Showgrounds Regional Sporting Precinct Master Plan. So firstly, welcome to everyone in the community gallery, our key stakeholder organisations. I'd like to welcome the elected members who are here to this workshop tonight, and of course council staff and our consultants from Edge. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for coming back once again. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge this land that we meet on tonight is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. So this workshop is classed as an informal gathering, and it has been convened for the purpose of discussing issues that involve the development of the Essex Park and Gawler Showgrounds Regional Sporting Precinct Master Plan, in particular the presentation of the initial concept plans for the area. So this session is to be used solely for the purpose of information sharing and not for the purpose of debating issues, building consensus positions or otherwise discharging council's deliberative and decision-making functions, because those functions sit with a council meeting and not outside of a council meeting. There's no set agenda and no minutes will be taken during this session. And if you have mobile phones, can you please turn them on silent? And if you need to take a phone call, can you please take that out of the room in the corridor somewhere away from where we're having our discussion. So there are copies of the information being presented tonight. I think, has everyone got a copy of what, I don't know what you've got, I haven't got it. Oh, yeah, I haven't got anything, so you're better than me at the moment. I've got nothing. So, oh, right. There we go. Lovely. I've got one now. Thank you. I think that's all. Now, just some basic housekeeping. In case you haven't been to the Civic Centre before, the toilets are, for the people in the gallery, they are to your right, just here, just outside the door. They're fairly easy to find. There's toilets on every floor. if you need. There's emergency exits, please follow the green signs, and we'll guide you if there is a fire or something like that. We have to get out quickly. Okay, what was that, Paul? You'll be running, right, okay. So we shouldn't need to go into confidence. This is a public workshop, but I do have instructions if we do, but I don't believe there will be any need for that tonight. So without any further ado, now ladies, if you can move over so we can actually see you, because you're actually hidden behind the screen. Can everybody see the two consultants? Yep. Brian, can you see them? Yep. Di? Yep. Okay.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, that's probably a bit better. Thanks, David. Okay, I might hand over. Who's taking us? Is that you, Bryce? Bryce Norton, who's been in charge of this project. I might hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for your attendance here tonight. So just a couple of dot points in regards to tonight's presentation is of the initial concept plans for the Essex Park and the Showgrounds Master Plan. So these plans have been informed through consultation that has been undertaken with council members, community stakeholders being leaseholders and the user groups, staff, and through numerous site assessments. So the concepts are also presented by Precinct, and this is seen as a key to implementing the plan going forward, with the ability to have smaller community organisation-driven projects, as well as the broader council-delivered initiatives towards that shared and considered vision. This session commences targeted consultation with stakeholders relative to the concepts being presented. So following tonight's session, there will be consultation with community stakeholder organisations and staff, which will further refine the concepts with the intention of bringing the draft master plan back to council to the October meeting. At that time, seeking endorsement for formal community consultation to occur through November. So with that, I'll pass over to Kelly and Adele.
I might just interrupt us quickly and welcome anybody who's watching on YouTube. Apologies for not acknowledging if you are out there in YouTube land. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. So as Bryce mentioned, just a site overview on the screen here for you. So again, lots of user groups on this site. We're quite constrained by the site in terms of the railway line, roads through, dissecting the precinct. So hence why we've done this plan in a bit of a more of a precinct plan that kind of go in stages together, but also with their help in any funding opportunities that you can do, you know, bit by bit. You don't need to do it all together, and it makes it a little bit more of a realistic approach. As mentioned, some of the consultation that we've already done. So we've spoken to clubs initially, which was almost a year ago, and due to COVID, obviously we had to stop for a fair few months, and now we've come back. And after that, Bryce has spoken to the clubs and reassured them that there'll be further discussions with them, and most of them have come back and said that the information that had been provided to us previously is still correct information, with a few little minor tweaks here and there, but they will be engaged again in consultation with these plans. So as mentioned, there's a lot of a lot of user groups on site. They were initially sent surveys, and we met with all user groups individually, and we spoke about their issues and opportunities for the site, some of their key constraints and opportunities. We also looked at their membership numbers, and we got those, and we got some good trends about what's been happening the last few years, and then where they feel they're going in the next 5 to 10 years. And most of the users across the site said that they'll be growing with their membership base by that 10 to 20, 30% mark. So it's quite a big growth in some of those clubs, and therefore we need to predict a master plan or a precinct plan that then will be able to match those future projections. Some of the key issues that we saw come out of those previous discussions with council staff, elected members and the site users were these 4 key issues. So around poor connectivity and wayfindings throughout the site. Sometimes you get to a spot and you can't go anywhere, and it's obviously dissected via railway line and the river and some of the streets. So those just naturally poor connections. Lack of community offering. When we had a session at the show, there was a lot of discussion about if you weren't part of a sporting user group, they didn't really come to the site because there was no real playground or offering for the community there. So one of the big areas of opportunities for this plan. Sometimes it's a bit of cluttered and inefficient use of the space. So how can we best provide spaces that are flexible, that are all more opened up to community, more opened for the sports and more usable? And then around non-compliant and redundant facilities in terms of the sports and being fit for purpose and multi-use and being compliant in terms of the sports standards and the guidelines.
So in response to a couple of these key issues, we've developed these guiding design principles for the master plan. So coming at it from a really high level approach, so that all moves that happen on site effectively have to address one of these principles. So drawing in the river character and really bringing that riparian character through to the frontage and less of a back of house and really celebrating that in the precinct. Creating community destinations, so actually providing spaces for the community to gather and spaces for the community to do things on the site. So it's working harder and providing more of an offering for the town of Gawler. Deliver sustainable outcomes across site. So very broad, but we do go flesh that out in the next page. But effectively that's just ensuring that any upgrades that happen across site have to consider the best possible sustainable future. Improve connections within precinct and beyond, fairly self-explanatory. About improving gateways, improving connections across barriers, etc. And future-proof site facilities. So as Kelly mentioned, there's enormous growth expected for some of these clubs and they're currently already quite aging and rundown facilities in some circumstances. So we need to be able to provide them with a future that's going to address their needs. So those principles effectively come together in this landscape design framework. So because of the nature of the site being so linear and the way that we've addressed it in precincts, we've developed this design framework to effectively tie the whole precinct together and to tie the site together at a high level strategic plan. So you can see I've fleshed out a few of those more detailed moves related to some of those key principles. So council managed community facilities versus formal and informal community facilities, the hierarchy of path network, and what some of the sustainable outcomes that we can look at across the site might be.
So as we've mentioned before, because of the way this site is laid out and the size and the constraints of this, we have broken it into precincts so that it can be staged. And we feel we will then get better outcomes for the individual areas, also funding opportunities. So across the site, some of those compliance and functionality issues were around the ageing of infrastructure. They're not compliant with some of the sports standards now. They're not fit for purpose. Some of them are not female friendly, so they don't have unisex change rooms. And obviously we're seeing huge growth across most of these sports on the site in terms of female participation. And funding opportunities that then go hand in hand with that. There's a lot of funding out there at the moment for these grassroots female friendly and how we can pick that up in the site.
So just before we jump into, I guess, dissecting those precincts, we've looked at this page as a site-wide moves opportunities. So just to tie the whole precinct together, there's these two big key moves that I guess span the entire precinct and unite them all together. Pedestrian Boulevard as the first item here in particular, we think has a lot of potential to really transform the area in terms of functionality, connectivity, the potential environmental impact it could have, and just generally improving the overall visual character and impression of the site. So huge opportunity to create a connected green frontage with a pedestrian boulevard to improve walking and cycling connections, improve arrivals from bus and train stations, opportunity to integrate water sensitive urban design with any roadway upgrades, and even lighting upgrades to more environmentally sustainable options if that's appropriate. So the other site-wide move that kind of ties it from the back of the site, I guess, is this continuation of the Gawler Urban Rivers Master Plan and a real focus on revegetation and beautification of that riverway.
So our first precinct that we'll run through, so we're going to run from north to south. So with these precincts, what we've done is we've broken all the precincts and their improvements into 2 stages. So stage 1 being, 0 to 7 to 10 years. And then stage 2 is that 8 to 10 plus years. Those things can change based on council's priorities or funding availability, but that's how some of those have been broken into. So the first stage is the Aquatic Centre and the tennis precinct. So these are based on the feasibility study that was endorsed by council a couple of years ago. So main ones cover around 2 new tennis courts, replacement of tennis court lighting and resurfacing and making those courts compliant, and shelters and some basic lawn area. And then stage 2 for the precinct then moves on to some of those bigger picture items in terms of new change rooms for the tennis club rooms, the aquatic centre, and looking what else that aquatic centre needs, pedestrian boulevards, community courts for the tennis, and barbecue and picnic, and some of those informal trails that then link back to those main areas. Our next precinct is the Petonk and Bowls area. So some of these early on first steps will be around the improved pathways, upgrading train station entry to the back of it, upgrading the lighting for Bowls and Petonk and some shade structures over some of those green spaces, fencing upgrades and a new Petonk playing field. Some of the bigger picture items of the precinct includes long-term in terms of what is the clubs, both of the clubs guiding principle around their club room and that future-proofing that. So there's some discussions that we still need to have with the club, and we'll have that at the next stage about what they feel going forward in the future. Is it together? Is it separate? And how we can, I guess, both best make them sustainable clubs in the future. Then we've got the Netball Association precinct. So we've had Bryce is having some ongoing discussions around netball with the association and Netball SA and about their future for the site, given it's a regional site for it. But netball here is played a little bit differently, with summer being their competition here and then winter is followed football clubs. So some of the first steps in here is around resurfacing and aligning courts. So these courts aren't compliant, so their runoffs are too small. Some of the runoffs are quite unsafe. So it's around making those courts compliant. It does mean that we lose 1 court to make them compliant, but the netball club and the association don't see that as a big issue based on their numbers. But it does get a better outcome in terms of the layout. So that's around the resurfacing, and then those extensions back to the shared paths, but also some safety lighting. Safety lighting in this area was quite a key issue for that. For the precinct, some of the girls coming out at night, walking down slopes of the informal car parking with not much safety lighting. So we see that as a priority for the first bit. And then in terms of stage 2, it's really around car park extension and the Netball Association and the club room and where that sees fit based on the new layout of the courts and bringing in some new change rooms and things like that for the area.
So we're now onto the Princes Park precinct. So in the short term, we'd be generally looking at improving access to this portion of the site. So with creating a new access right at the northern portion of the site on the corner of Thomas Terrace, I think it is, and down at the southern end of the site, really improving that river gateway and making that a really safe and known access, which it currently is a little bit hidden and feels a little bit unsafe during showtime. About improving and upgrading the show sheds. So currently potentially not the most efficient layout that they could have. Show has expressed that they would like them to be more multifunctional. So realigning those to the rear of the site to really open up the front of the space. Some small community infrastructure like a community court, shelter, and the expansion of the Princes Park Oval to allow for a compliant junior sports width, which will give Gawler Central and potentially other sports an opportunity to run more junior sport, which they currently don't really have. So from here, the long-term outcome of this particular region of the site is fairly heavily dependent on the future of the sport and community centre. So we've developed up to high-level options for the community centre, which then has two resultant, plan outcomes. So option one that we've looked at is the possible extension or expansion of the current centre. So this involves the expansion of the Gawler Central Sporting Club to the north of the current Heritage Pavilion and slight expansion to the northwest of the Roller Sports Stadium. So I guess between Roller Sports and Gawler Central, they were the two critical users of this particular centre that are not currently achieving compliance with the amount of square meterage that they need. So worth noting that both options that we've prepared look at promoting and preserving the Heritage Pavilion and just have a different external interface, and both options are quite high level, so it's just a bubble arrangement at this stage based on square metre requirements and compliance and functionality of the users. So using the expansion option, the long-term approach for this site, you can see the impact that that has on the entryway and some of the knock-on effects there. Outside of that, there's a little bit more infrastructure around the showgrounds, the northern precinct around the showgrounds, some upgrade of some more infrastructure like the cattle sheds. In particular, the cattle sheds is about improving the visual permeability to the back of the site and improving some of those visual connections and wayfinding. The second option for the the sport and community centre, is a new build option, which potentially has more opportunity in terms of the alignment and potential two-storey capacity. But that's something that we definitely need to discuss with both council staff, site users and yourselves to determine moving forwards. And then the long-term outcome of that particular approach, you can see that because of the orientation, it sort of opens up that really narrow point through the site a little bit more. So yeah, again, food for thought, worth talking about. To the south of that, we're looking at the Gawler Oval precinct. So short term, it's about providing a turf pitch for the cricket club and improving and upgrading their cricket nets to suit the new turf pitch. Some minor infrastructure for community, such as informal trails and some of that riparian vegetation and some ephemeral works there. Formalising the entryway and car parking around the oval, as in particular a number of site users expressed that the dust that rises from around that oval is really quite bothersome, especially during showtime. Where are we? And then long term, it's effectively about improving and maximising the viewer and spectator experience of this particular oval with lawn viewing mounds, upgrades to grandstands as needed, and potentially a new court for the Gawler Central netball clubs, as the cricket nets will have moved away from that space. So if there's need due to growth, that there's an opportunity there for them. Just something that is worth noting for this particular site is that currently the AFL oval doesn't meet compliance because of the width of the greyhounds track, which we have looked into and effectively found it's cost prohibitive to change the greyhound track. So that's one of those compliance issues that we just won't be able to achieve here. So after all of that, it effectively comes together in this master plan, which is just reiterating everything that we've already expressed, but then tying it back to those guiding principles. And you can see sort of even mix of sports infrastructure, community infrastructure, environmental moves, etc. And just to round it out, I guess a bit of an update in terms of timelines. You can see in purple that we're currently here testing master plan moves with yourselves. From here, over the next sort of 3-ish weeks, we're then planning to take this particular package to the site users and council staff and get their impressions and their feedback, really compile all that and process that with the feedback that we get here tonight, and update anything that needs updating and come back to yourselves towards the end of October for approval to go to community consultation.
Is there any questions for us or clarification needed? It's a lot to digest, and
Just talking to the mic.
it's a lot to digest, and given the site and the context of it. So we're happy to answer any questions or clarifications.
No problem. I'll take Councillor Kosh and Councillor Hughes in that order. Thank you.
Look, yeah, thanks for the presentation. Through the presentation, you identified a number of sports that are non-compliant. What's the ramifications and the responsibility now of this council?
So non-compliant in terms of their facility guidelines. So we revert back to the guidelines for those particular sports. In terms of football and cricket and things like that, a lot of it is to do with change rooms and size of social areas and things like that. When you go for funding and you've done plans like this, and you can say that, you know, we're bringing these facilities up to standard, they're always looked favourably on. If you don't meet compliant standards, I guess you run the risk of not being able to host finals and things like that. And that's what can happen, and it has happened down in metropolitan Adelaide. They'll generally go to facilities that are compliant to host finals and those types of things. Same with netball. Netball SA, you need to determine what their priority for the site is as well. But sometimes it's in terms of safety. So netball courts, for example, if they don't have the runoff, you know, you've got two games side by side, you run the risk of people injuring themselves. And if they're not at that standard, they're at the end of the day, they're a guideline. They're not a mandatory policy, but they are a guideline. And I guess it's our duty to design a space up to those guidelines so that they're the best practice for the sports.
Yeah, you use the term duty. I mean, there might be a duty of care responsibility from our point of view if we know that there's non-compliant facilities. For example, if the netball courts are too close and people are clashing and if people are injured, there might be an issue there. I'm not sure where we stand now.
So in terms of the project and nationally, so our company has got a contract with AFL, Tennis Australia, and Cricket Australia and those types of things. So nationally, they have rolled out an audit process of all the facilities across Australia in those sports. So there are audit information that we'll give to Bryce as part of this process that shows, but nothing from a maintenance or a trip hazard or a critical issue has come out of any of those reports. The guideline is around those compliance issues. Yeah, so they'll always be flagged if there was a duty of care or something quite hazardous would fly out of those.
Councillor Hughes?
It's a fantastic plan. I really think you've sort of captured everything that we initially sort of asked for, which is really good. And I really like the riparian zone and getting that vegetated area because the dust issue is huge. But as a usable space and actively able to be used, do you think this plan will actually work with all these spaces so linear and spread out and you know, the diagrams and everything look fantastic, but do you think it's actually going to work if we are successful in getting this up?
I think from that perspective, the nature of the site and I guess why we've tried to include at least one, even if it is an informal community piece of infrastructure in each precinct, is that it's not the kind of precinct that we imagine people will kind of traverse and spend time in the whole zone. They may do, but I guess we're coming at it from more of a perspective that people generally tend to travel to the precinct that they were going to, and then within each precinct, it's then got a little bit for everybody. It's got a little bit of offering that then is more enticing to stay and spend time in, rather than having to travel to, you know, for example, having to cross the railway line to go to Princes Park because there's only place you can get open lawn space, for example. So in that kind of perspective, that's how we've tried to tackle it, which I'm not sure if that sort of answers your question.
It's also in terms of some of those guiding principles, because they were so consistent across the whole precinct, regardless of where that was, there are those common themes. So we feel that with those common themes and with some of those wayfinding paths and things, the precinct will all join together. At the moment, we feel it's very disjointed. Yeah. It's very dysfunctional where buildings are and the relationship with those buildings versus the sport. We feel this plan brings that together and ties that together, and it's not just about a precinct in the north and a precinct in the south and got netball across. We're trying to bring everybody in together, and we feel with some of those path networks and those internal networks, it will help.
Yeah, no, I agree in those community spaces, especially for that whole showgrounds area is really good. But do you then think there's going to be car parking issues for big events, or is it enough car parks for different precincts to work? And
Car parks is always a really interesting one. Even if it's just purely sport, you should always, I guess, allow enough car parks for a normal weekend game day, not a big event, because you're never going to be able to provide a big event. So we've run some numbers, and yeah, there's going to need to be a little bit more, and that's going to have to be looked at in that next detail. But some of the early benchmarks suggest that, I guess, for a normal game day, with some of those sports are on, that there will be sufficient numbers.
Just on the pedestrian and wayfinding and access, you can't really see how that is improved at all. You've got arrows, but I can't see where it's improved. Can you just walk us through what your thinking is around that? And because it doesn't jump off the page.
Yeah, apologies. Due to the, I guess, complexity of the site, some of those broader moves too tend to sort of get a little bit lost. Generally, something that we've tried to allow for is, where possible, formalising a path where there's currently potentially a goat track, or, you know, you can see that there's a desire line there. We've tried to formalise. So, for example, down the back of the netball courts along the railway line, we've included a small nature trail through there. We've looked at extending what is currently the beginnings of a linear trail, which effectively stops at the netball precinct. We've looked to try and continue that even in an informal capacity along the entire river line, down the back of most precincts, which will extend all the way through up to Horrocks Highway. The Pedestrian Boulevard we see as a really key one to improve that connectivity.
It is connected. You can get all the way through.
You can?
Yeah.
The linear trail?
Yeah.
I thought it cut off
No.
at the back.
No.
Oh, apologies.
No, you go all the way through. It's open all of the time. Yep. So.
Yeah, sorry. We received feedback from the site users that once you got to about the bowls, it was no longer a formal.
No, it goes all the way through.
Okay.
It goes around behind the club rooms, and then you go around behind the showgrounds. So it's completely connected.
Okay.
All the time.
In that case, from our perspective, and what has become immediately apparent, is that it's about making that very visually aware from the rest of the precinct, because, yeah, as we've been out there a number of times and it wasn't apparent to us, unfortunately. So, yeah, definitely something that we'll then capture and express, that that's what needs to happen for that, is that it needs to be more signposted, for example.
Yeah, so that would be some of my feedback, because it is accessible. You can do the 14.5K bike trail, walking trail. It's completely connected, but certainly, yeah, I think just improving the connectivity and wayfinding and make it more amenable to people. Now, I think it was Councillor Sample and then Councillor Little.
Thank you, Mayor Karen. I'm just wondering, ladies, on the map 14 and 15, probably 15, in 1984, the Show Society, which is the largest event that we have for population and problems with parking, where you see number 2 on that map, see where number 2 is listed there? Yep. Well, there used to be a road across there, and that road used to go across the railway line. Well, after a lot of debate with the railways and the government, and that's not hard to do, basically the Show Society tried to get an underground tunnel under there to assist with parking, because on show days and that, there's so much parking that can be utilised around where the netball courts are. Mm-hmm. And my second question is, when you move from number 2 southwards, there's a huge area there that you haven't got any indication of parking. And I think, you know, because of the access that goes under the bridge, and if there was a tunnel under the railway line, vehicles could actually go from one to the other. But is there any reason why it's not indicated there could be parking there in that huge area, which is a crappy colour there, you know, where the trail goes through it, down from 2?
So is this the plan that you're currently talking about?
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
Is it this one?
Go
No,
back,
on page 15.
14 and 15.
Okay, so
There
yeah.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I guess from our perspective, are you talking about, I wonder if this will work from that distance, this
Yeah,
space
that's
here?
it. Yeah.
I guess from what we observed when we were out there is that that's currently quite valuable vegetation land. There's some remnant vegetation in there, some very beautiful vegetation through there. That's probably one of the better parts of the linear trail. And we really wanted to, I guess, maintain and build upon that rather than sacrifice that for the sake of car
There's a lot
parking.
of trees there, a lot of trees, and they're
But-
quite mature.
Yeah, but I mean, from that token though, like this is looking at having fairly substantial formalised parking to the north of the netball courts, which currently there is none. It's just open land, which is reasonably difficult to navigate because of the slopes. So yeah, I completely can understand the perspective for the desire for more parking. And it's something that we'll definitely look at moving forwards, is whether or not we've found that balance between providing as much parking as possible and then also not sacrificing the greater site and the usability.
So just with I'm looking at page 15 and 14, you've put it, because that drops away quite quickly behind the club rooms, the netball club rooms. You've got a lot of parking there, and that's probably sitting on that area that's down below. So what's your thinking? Because wouldn't you have to build that up quite substantially to put parking that? It looks like level parking there.
Yeah, so I guess from very initial thoughts looking at that, it would either be, like you said, it would either have to be raised, or it would be at a lower level, slightly lower level than the club rooms. But again, it's a bit of a detailed thing. From a preliminary look at it, we think it could be achievable. From a detailed perspective, that's something that would definitely need to be investigated further. But we've tried to be mindful of the fact that there is a fairly significant level drop there. So potentially that may need to be pulled back in certain areas.
It's about 2 metre drop.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not insignificant.
no, definitely.
And I guess that's some of the feedback we're having now, is that because it's so informal and cars are parking and then girls are playing, and then at night time there's no lighting there, it's quite unsafe. So we need to look at, I guess, how we can formalise that to make it safe, but also to provide car parking.
So an example that I'll refer you to is that the Campbelltown Arc has got a similar situation where the car parking that they provide is on a significantly different level to the community facility. So whether there's a scissor back or a different approach that we could look at for the parking in this area that draws upon some of those lessons learnt there, but effectively it is potentially achievable.
Councillor Little?
I've got the same issue as Councillor Kosh, because we're not going to be compliant in a lot of these areas. Funding, as we know, is the main thing nowadays. And we got the 3 main things here. We've got the show, we've got the sporting facilities, and we've got the dogs. And then you said they can't move the dog track. So my problem is, if we're going to spend a lot of money, or ratepayers' money, to fix that area, if we're going to be non-compliant about 2 of those areas, I find that some of the plan sort of lacks forethought in regard to what are the other options if we can't get these compliance things through.
In terms of the oval around the compliance, obviously there's some exceptions that are given, and this would be an exception given by Sandfall and those types of things, that this is an unusual size. Same, there's one at Morpheville that's, they call it the donut. So it's a really unusual shape, but they do allow finals and that to be played because it's got the club rooms, it's got the other amenities that they need. So I think this would be, next point is for us to talk to those state sporting bodies, and I know this would be already earmarked as one of those. So I think in terms of the size of the oval, I think we're fine, as long as we've got those other amenities to then support that in terms of change rooms and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
If I could, just on that point about compliance, I don't know whether Councillor Little might be thinking it's not a question of compliance for the purposes of being able to have finals, but compliance for the purpose of getting funding.
Oh, I think.
And will those non-compliance inhibit receiving funding.
Yeah, so on the same point, I guess if we were putting in change rooms that were non-compliant for male and female, it wouldn't get any funding. It wouldn't get looked at favourably, but the oval would be fine in those types of things. So I don't think the oval size or the shape is going to prohibit any of the funding to then go into those components. No. Because I'll say Morfettville got $5 million and their oval is non-compliant. So they've just had a brand new. Yeah.
That is Walkerville. Okay. Councillor Little?
To get back to the point, I know I'm harping, but it's also our primary area for the show. So if we're going to be non-compliant, for us to assist the show people to upgrade facilities like change rooms, things like that, we need to be sure when we go for funding that, yeah, we want this so the show, it can be used for the show, it can be used for cricket thing.
Correct.
My problem is, because I had a meeting with the minister earlier in last year, and his aim at the time was that they want to have everything compliant as much as they could. And he stressed quite categorically that if you had two people going for a situation and one is compliant and one's not, guess where the fundings are going to go? That's my main concern. I don't want the ratepayers of Gawler to pay out a lot of money and then we don't get it. That's where I'm coming from.
And it's 90% of built compliance. It's around change rooms, it's around amenities, it's around first aid rooms, it's around medical, unisex, flexible spaces internally. And the cricket nets are a big thing as well. Oval as such, it doesn't really play a big part in that compliance in funding. It's really around those guidelines. So our company wrote the guidelines. So for AFL and for Cricket Australia and for Tennis Australia, so we're comfortable that what we've put forward on this plan, and when we go to do detailed drawings for those building footprints and those types of things, that they'll be compliant, which is where the funding, I guess, is attached to. Yeah.
Councillor Hughes?
Myself and Councillor Kosh and the senior staff, we met with the sports minister as well last year, and he was really pushing the whole family friendly side of things very strongly. That was his really main. He wanted the whole family to be able to go to a precinct and use it, and that's what he wanted to see. And I think we sort of nailed that. And I think that was a really high percentage of what he was looking at. Any comments on that sort of?
Yeah, we've done, both of our companies in the last just 2 years have probably done about 10 master plans together, and probably 3 to 4 or 5 of those have already received funding through the grassroots, because it does have those elements. So this side is good because it's got those 4 main sports that all the funding is attached to at the moment. So it's football, cricket, tennis and netball, because that's where the growth in females coming through, which means mum is playing and they're bringing kids. They need to have amenities for that. So yeah, it's around those parks, community spaces, female friendly change rooms and those spaces. So yeah, comfortable that we've allowed that. And one of the reasons why we've included some of those community spaces and that playground. Because at the end of the day, not everyone wants to play sport. So we need to, I guess, appease everybody and attract everyone to the site as possible.
Just a word on accessibility. How have you improved accessibility?
Well, I guess from, 2 definitions for that. So accessibility in terms of disability accessibility. We've looked...
Just all users accessibility.
All users, yeah. So where possible, because that was feedback that we received at the show, was that there's not as much accessible pathways that there could be. So looking to seal pathways where possible. But I guess one of the major accessibility points from an opening up of the site and welcoming people to the site is creating that new gateway to the north, which on this plan. So creating a new entry around this fairly critical point. So the arrival experience from the train station to the site is a much more direct connection through there. And potentially also the crossing over the railway line, which this sort of corner, this pinch point, is a real key gateway to a lot of the areas of the site. So we'd look to open that up in terms of an access to the point, to the site.
Because some of the sites are completely inaccessible. So what have been your discussions with the user groups around making them accessible? Because Councillor Little makes a really good point. Ratepayers of Gawler, they're going to invest, they're going to want to have access. So have you had discussions around getting rid of the barbed wire, for example?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've tried to identify fairly much across the site where we believe there should be fencing upgrades to potentially less hospitable fencing types, more welcoming fencing types, and areas where we can do away with fencing altogether, albeit keeping in mind safety and security reasons. But, you know, these things can be managed through screening and planting and things that are a lot softer and a lot more visually welcoming than hard fencing. So I think it's a really good point that you bring up, and I think it's something that we should definitely focus on when we talk to the site users and see what some of their perspectives are on some of these things.
Okay, Councillor Koch.
Yeah, look, I just want to make a comment. I quite like the where you're going with this. In particular, like the improvements around community offerings, because not everybody wants to play sport. I was involved in a citizen science survey through the Adelaide University recently, where we went out and audited open spaces. And what has come through that research is that people actually value the open spaces, in particular informal spaces, for informal recreation. So I think you're going down the right track.
Right.
Especially putting those community facilities in is fantastic, because as you know, not everybody's playing footy or cricket. I'd like them to, but they're not. But they like sort of, you know, sitting around looking at birds and plants, etc., and, you know, walking through natural areas. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other discussion? Well, any final words, Bryce? Next steps?
Sure, thank you. And once again, thank you for everyone's attending and participation tonight. So yeah, we'll take on board all the comments and feedback that has been provided, but also very much welcome any of the council members here to have the ability to provide further comments to myself over the next 2 to 3 weeks while we're meeting with the sporting organisations and the community organisations. We'll take all of that on board and look to come back to the October council meeting with a draft master plan, and look forward to discussing it then.
Thank you. And thank you, ladies, for coming along. Thank you, everyone, all the way down there in the Institute. What was that? Oh, right. Okay. Well, I think all this feedback will be coming back to you through further consultation from the staff and consultants back to the user group. So the feedback that's provided here tonight will filter back through those further discussions. I think that's right, isn't it, Bryce? Yeah, so there have been some good discussion tonight. So thank you, everyone. We'll close the workshop, and I hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you.